こんばんは。フォレックス TV ニューヨークのレミです。2月19日火曜日の為替レポートニューヨークレビューをお伝えします。19日の3連休明けのアメリカ株式市場は小幅に続落しました。ダウ平均は10ドル99セント安の 12,337 ドル22セントで終えた。ナスダック総合株価指数は 15.60 ポイント安の 2306.20 で終えた。19日の取引で原油や金など商品先物相場が急進しました。ニューヨーク外国為替市場で円相場は株式市場睨みの取引が続きました。ドル円は前週末比変わらずの1ドル107円75銭から85銭で取引を終えた。またユーロ円は前週末比45銭円安ユーロ高の158円70銭から80銭で取引を終えた。それでは ACM のピーター・ローゼンストライクさんとのインタビューをご覧ください。
Well, as we come back from the three-day holiday weekend, we're seeing the U.S. dollar weaker against both the euro and the Australian dollar. And it's been quite a session with a rally over in commodities and crude topping $100 a barrel today. But if you could start out by telling us what's driving euro strength against the U.S. currency in today's session.
Well, in regards to core drivers, currently we believe that the market is still very much focused on interest rates. Not so much of what the Fed is going to do, given the fact that Bernanke has made it very clear his commitment to aggressively easing and doing whatever it takes to make sure that the U.S. economic health is there and supported by interest rates. This theory has sort of been relatively conferred given the fact that the Fed cut roughly 125 basis points in 2 weeks while the dollar stayed relatively stable and even advanced for a period of time. So the focus is on really what other central banks are going to do. In 2007, the global headlines were talking about a global easing cycle, and it read very, very well, but overall what we're seeing is that monetary policy has become very nation dependent, which creates a level of uncertainty. Overall, against the majors that are going to an easing cycle, we are subscribing to the dollar smiles theory, meaning the dollar will get weaker and then gain some strength in Q2, Q3 before getting weak for the end of the year. While countries on hold or even raising rates in both G10 and emerging markets should perform well against the U.S. dollar in 2008.
Well, Peter, you just mentioned central banks and how most central banks have been cutting rates, but one central bank that has continued to hike is the RBA. And overnight, due to what we saw from the latest RBA meeting, the minutes, we saw Aussie rally against the U.S. dollar above the 92 mark. So if you could give us your take on what you expect to see from the RBA and where you see Aussie headed both in the near term and long term.
Remy, you bring up a good point. We think the Aussie dollar is going to be relatively strong in the near term. The RBA minutes that we saw last night repeated a lot what was said by officials. The critical fact was that the board was considering a 50 basis point move in February, and that the choice between 25 and 50 basis points was finally balanced as they stated. We believe that the RBA will hike twice more to 5.5 in the very near term. We see a potential for an April move and even going, say, 50 basis points in one fell swoop in that meeting. Given the inflation, looking at the minutes specifically, the RBA is very eager to lower inflation rate expectations. So they're going to act very aggressively. And finally, the RBA's underlying inflation forecast still remains very much above the target band for the next 1 to 2 years. So they need to pull back on this forecast. In our opinion, the financial markets, the instability in the financial markets is really the only factor that's going to hold the RBA back from going for a second rate hike. In terms of the Aussie, like I stated before, it should appreciate further in the near term. But given the fact that the market has fully priced in 2 more rate hikes, a lot of the move is going to be based more on interest rate differentials than the expectation of a rate hike. But overall, we see the Aussie staying above the 92 level in the near term.
Well, Peter, while we're on the higher yielding currencies, let's take a look at cable. In today's session, the sterling was little changed against the U.S. currency, but it did pull back against the euro. But in the longer term, if you could tell us what will be driving up price action for the currency, both from a fundamental and technical perspective.
Well, again, we are still very focused on interest rates. The BOE eased rates last week, but officials really have cautioned against further cuts due to the inflation concerns. The February MPC minutes really underline the message that we saw from the inflation report, that the committee is really unlikely to move at a faster pace or a policy, increasing the pace of policy loosening in the near term. In effect, this should push the market interest rate expectations slightly higher, and that will bring the cable with it in the near term. But overall, we think the underlying economic conditions in the UK have somewhat deteriorated, probably more so than the MPC is giving the market credit for, and will need to go a lot faster and further than they're pricing in right now.
以上 ACM のピーター・ローゼンストライクさんとのインタビューでした。ForexTV ニューヨークのレミがお伝えしました。最新の為替情報については ForexTV ジャパンをご覧ください。